Okay, welcome to week 2 of writing for the web. This week, what we're going to focus on is chapter 2 in our textbook, and the topic that we're going to be focusing on is getting to know our customers and creating those conversations. And so, as you can see here on the screen, I've got a Kindle version of the textbook that I'm going to be using so you can all kind of follow along with the lecture. Um, the most important thing that you can do when you first start writing your content is thinking about how you want to get to know your user and what kind of site experience, website experience you want your user to have when they get to your site. And so, one of the most important things that you can do in terms of planning that is basically just good old fashioned market research. And so, the first thing we want to do is before we start that market research, or as we're thinking about that market research, is we want to frame the conversation in terms of what we want our audience members to be doing when they get to our site. I mean, what is our goal as the author? What kind of actions do we want them to undertake? And so if you look here, we don't want to say, as the site owner or the site manager, we don't want to say we want to sell shoes. It comes across as too pushy, it doesn't come across with the right message. And so we want to switch that over to something like, we want people to buy shoes from us. Instead of we want to give out a lot of information, we want to answer people's questions. And so once again, this is one of those things that puts it back onto your users in a way from the business. And as a result, when you take that kind of philosophical approach, your content is going to come across much warmer. It's going to come across as more personable for each of your individual users. So once again, really keep that focus of your writing on the actions of your site users. Now, what's going to happen when you do that is that you're naturally going to end up in a situation where you have a more natural conversation. And by having a more natural conversation, your audience members are going to be much more interested in your site content. They're not going to be feeling all the time like they're being sold something. So taking a look here, one thing that's going to be important that I'm going to come back to that I want to note at this part of the reading is this discussion of SEO. There's going to be a video after the short lecture video on SEO. I know some of you probably have some experience with SEO. Some of you have maybe even taken Don Rauscher's class on SEO, which would give you a fairly substantial background, but other folks may need a little review on this topic. So I'm going to be posting a video on SEO that will be important for you to watch. So once you start thinking about the conversation, as I said before, you need to go out and you need to get some research. And so you need to find out who your site visitors are going to be. So let's kind of look at it. Let's do a little drawing here and let's look at what I mean by this. So your primary goal in terms of a content writer, your number one goal is to interpret the needs of your user, or otherwise know your user. So if you want to know your user, you're going to need some information about your user. And so you got to go out and find as much information about your site visitors as you possibly can. Not all your site visitors are going to be the same, and not all of your site visitors are going to end up at your site from the same place. And so it'll be important for you to start thinking about what's going to be the best approach. And each project that you encounter is going to have a different set of a different approach that you need to take in order to learn who your site users are. But first thing you can do here is if you've got a contact us page and people have been sending in emails, you can read those emails, read feedback if your website has a feedback page. Even if this is a site that's being redesigned, get the old information from the previous site. It'll still help you. It'll let you know who's ending up at that particular site. The next thing is read reviews, recommendations, blogs. This is anything that's either from within the business that you're writing for, or maybe other people who are talking about your business or who are in the industry. Get to know who is cycling through these pages. Maybe go and spend a day if your business has a customer service department, or maybe one person who deals with customer service. Go spend some time with that person. They're a wealth of knowledge. Marketing, who does the marketing for your business? Sit down and talk with them, because my guess is that whoever's doing the marketing already has a pretty good idea of who your site users are going to be, or your site visitors. So spend some time talking to them. Talk to colleagues about usability, user experience. What have they learned? Analyze your site search logs. So your site search logs can be a wealth of information. And this is basically who's looking for your site. How do they end up at your site? A lot of websites will have some tracking information. They'll know which websites the person came from previous to logging onto your site. If that happens to be the case, you might find a pattern in those search logs, which will tell you some information about who's ending up on the site that you're going to be writing for. So use analytics. That kind of goes into what I was just describing a little bit more. Both of these are connected. Social media. Log onto the social media sources that you're using. This could include Google Plus, Facebook, Twitter, and then maybe LinkedIn. It depends on what kind of business you're writing for. But look around. What's going on in social media about your industry or about your particular business itself, if it's a fairly established and well-known business. So the next thing, track the media conversations. What's going on in the news about this business and or industry? All of these things are going to help give you a whole bunch of information about your users and what they're interested in. Okay, the next thing that you need to think about is, so after I found out about these site users, what am I going to do with them? Oh, there's a few more good tips here. Interview people. Interviewing people is going to be instrumental. This is something I know when I've done professional content writing in the past. I'll go out and interview a bunch of people. And just sitting down and talking to people who use that website is going to be extremely valuable. Sometimes even website owners or business owners will look out and say, this is what we want our website to do. But then after sitting down and talking with people who actually are using their website or frequenting their website, it turns out that sometimes the customers have a very different view than the particular business owner. And so whether or not you are the business owner or you're working for the business owner, go out and interview people who are using the site. And then the last thing down here, which is I think a really good idea, is do usability testing of the current content, and watch and sit and listen to people in other places. So this is a two-part process. If you have current content on a website, sit down and watch people actually surfing the site. And so you may want to bring in some people who have never been to the site but might be a likely customer or a likely site visitor. Sit them down in front of a computer and ask them, say, hey, I want you to navigate this site. Go check it out. Move around in the site. How does it seem to you? How does it work? What pages are helpful? Which pages could be improved? Those folks will tell you a lot of information about how you can help make the language in the site more intuitive. Remember, this all goes back to the number one thing is that your task here is starting a conversation. And that conversation is directed by these people. It can't be a one-sided conversation. This has to be a two-part process. The other thing that this topic right here mentions, I'm going a little out of order here, but this topic says go to the brick and mortar business and sit and observe and listen to real customers. So let's say you're writing a website or content for a website that has a physical location connected to it. Go to that physical location and just hang out there for a day. Talk to people. Go up and talk to customers and even ask them and say, hey, I'm writing some content for this business. What would you want to see on a website if you were to visit this business's website? What would be the most helpful for you? And I think you'll find that approach and thinking about your users first is going to create a much different sense of who your audience happens to be. And you got to know who your audience is before you can talk to them. And this is going to be a long talk that you have with your users every time they come back to visit your site. Okay. Now, the rest of this chapter, I'm not going to go through line by line. You can read it and check it out. But the main thing that I want you to start thinking about after you've read everything is the section at the end where we start creating a persona. And so a persona is a fairly common task that web developers or web content writers will undertake. And they'll actually go through and they'll look at demographic research or information, and they will create different they're not real people, but they represent different demographics of visitors who will come to the site. And so let's say that we want to create a persona for Joe. We're going to go through and Joe's not obviously a real person, somebody we make up, but we're going to give Joe a career. We're going to give Joe, um, you know, what kind of hobbies Joe has. How much money does Joe spend on the internet? Does he have kids? Does he not have kids? Does he have a family? Is he married? What kind of car maybe does Joe drive? I mean, it really depends. Um, each each site is going to be different, and so you're going to want to dictate your personas somewhat to exemplify the type of user that you're going to have on your site. If you are doing this for a large company and a big website, you may end up making 10 or 15 personas. And if you were working in a physical office location, these personas might even be hung around the office. And then throughout your day, as you're working with your team, both your web development team and your other content writers, you'd be walking around and you'd be looking at these people's pictures and you'd be thinking about, what can I do to make a website for Joe? How can I make the site intuitive so that when Joe gets to the site, he's going to understand what he needs, where he needs to go, and everything's going to flow very smoothly once he enters that website. So that's, again, that comes down to the conversation. So these personas, they provide faces that you can actually more or less dialogue with. I'm not suggesting that you're actually going to be talking to the pictures, but you're going to start having a professional dialogue and thinking about them as real people and real users. So here you can see there's a couple examples of a persona. This is a persona for Open University, a young woman who they're obviously a demographic that they're going to be drawing from, and this kind of typifies a person from that demographic. The next one here, Edith's information is not very clear here. It's much better in the book than on this Kindle version, but you can see Edith has is another demographic for a different business. So basically, after you get through with your reading assignment today, your job and your task is going to be to create a persona for Flying Women or Flying Woman, which is a made-up fly fishing website in the Flathead Valley.